This is the Roller Coaster Podcast, and I'm your host, Lucy Q. Life is a wild ride. It has twists and turns. It's scary, exciting, and downright fun. So throw your head back, arms in the air, and come along with me for the ride.
Life is like a roller coaster, baby, baby. I wanna ride.
Episode 200 of the roller coaster will soon be here, and this is your chance to be part of the fun. I'm going to be recording this episode with coaches and listeners just like you. If you want to be part of the fun, head over to nectargrowth.com. Sign up for free and RSVP for the November 18th event. All of the details will be under the events tab. I can't wait to see you there. What are you waiting for? Come join us. You know you're worth it. If there was ever a time to listen to the whisper that you hear in the quiet of night, that little tap on the shoulder, the twinge that you feel on your stomach, now is the time. What am I talking about? I'm talking about discovering your purpose. Uncovering it might not be as easy as finding the toy at the bottom of the Cracker Jacks box, but the beauty and all of its gifts are part of the journey. Joining me today is Mary Katherine Morales, affectionately known as MK, to chat about her story of overcoming unworthiness, shame, and addiction. Hi, MK.
Hey, Lucy. I'm so excited to be here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me. And as we chatted just before we hit record, we have similar stories, and I'd like to start off with you sharing your story.
Well, all right. My story is really your story and probably thousands of your listeners. And that's really the journey of becoming all that God is calling us to be. And the way I like to talk about it really is three things. It's the journey of transforming our thought process and our mind, living a courageous life every day, and rising to the call and to the purpose that is upon your life and my life and the life of your listeners and your tribe. And I am a fully recovered addict. I am free. But addiction is really just the symptom of something deeper, more troubling. And for me, it's the story of overcoming unworthiness and shame. I really had no idea growing up as a little girl how awesome I am. And I don't mean, I don't come from a place of pride. I say that because you are amazing. Your listeners are amazing. We all have a special gift that we offer the world. And I lost my way because I remember the very first time I felt separate from. I was deaf as a little girl until I was 13 years old. And I distinctly remember in, I think it was second grade, my second grade teacher called my parents, who had no idea that I was legally deaf, by the way. I came across, I guess, as being a little disruptive and hard to manage. And my second grade teacher called and said, Sandy, I don't think she's actually a bad child, so to speak. I think she can't hear. I think you should take her to get her hearing looked at. Well, I was legally deaf. I had a hearing impairment, and I distinctly remember feeling separate from the world. I remember standing outside of groups of people and feeling like there was something fundamentally wrong with me and not really being able to put my finger on it. And so feeling that way for so long and going through, hundreds of doctor's appointments to get to the bottom of it, I just remember feeling alone and left out. And I know that I'm not the only young woman at that time who felt that way, but for whatever reason, I internalized it and turned to a couple of things. I always felt like I had to perform to win. I always felt like if I was perfect and could compensate for my hearing impairment, that maybe I would be loved and maybe I would be accepted. And those are two, what I know now, like I like to call them character defects, but those are a couple of things that became very competitive in swimming and different things. And again, I just thought that if I could perform well, that I could be loved and accepted. So fast forward, I did end up getting my hearing back. Thank God. That was like one of the first miracles in my life. But by then, the story of unworthiness and shame was so big. And it was like a snowball effect. Went to college and, was very successful in college. Sororities, fraternities, college clubs, cheerleader, but when all of that ended, there was still the emptiness and the void inside of me. And so I loved being a college cheerleader because it was a way for me to perform to win down on the field, tumbling across the football field. It was all performance-based love and affection. And when all of that ended and I went into a career in broadcast media, the perform to win mindset really just catapulted. And I had an amazing job in radio, broadcast media, top 40 radio station in Orlando, Florida, had tons of really amazing accounts, right? So from the outside, I look like a young woman, all American who had it all together, right? But little did they know that on the inside, the anxiety, the fear, the shame, and the unworthiness was growing, was expanding. And I ended up getting involved with really dangerous people, doing really dangerous things, and became an addict and an alcoholic. And I used to be afraid to tell people about that. I used to be ashamed. But today I know it's another miracle and another gift from God. And you and I were chatting before we hit the play button about a message that you got from the Spirit of Love. And I have one very similar. I was a young woman, again, a terrible addiction. And I was reaching into the closet to get something else, to fix the emptiness and the brokenness and the anxiety inside. And as I was reaching into the closet to get my next fix, I said, God, please, there's got to be another way. Like, this is a terrible life. And I said, I will take anything other than this crazy addiction, because by this time, my parents were pissed at me. My brother wasn't talking to me. I had lost that big fancy job that I was just talking about in broadcast media. And I pretty much was hitting rock bottom. And it was as I was crying out to God that I said, again, I'll take this, those 5 big nasty diseases that a lot of people know about. And literally in my spirit, I heard, Mary Katherine, you will recover and you'll write a book about the journey through hell to home. And at that time I was like, no, that is by far the worst idea I've ever heard in my entire life. Don't you know, Spirit of Love, Father God, that I am a woman consumed with shame, unworthiness, and fear? Why would you think I'd ever have the courage to write a book and to start a movement for women? And, but something really powerful happened in that moment. Although I never thought I would be brave enough to tell my story and start the community called Women of Principle, I knew at that moment I wasn't alone. And that this higher power, this supernatural source of love, actually knew me by name. And so fast forward, there was a lot more. I met my husband and tried to hide my addiction from him for, a couple of years, and that didn't work, right? Ever. It never works. Don't ever tell a lie about that, because it never works. And my addiction just kept getting worse, regardless of my relationship. One of the really the worst episodes in my life, it helped to get me sober, but it was the night of our wedding. And this is actually in my book, one of the most painful moments. It was one of the moments where I really had to ask myself, like, am I brave enough to tell this story? You know, so I always wanted to be married. I always wanted a big wedding. And when I got married, I think I was 33 at the time. We had 280 people, candelabras, beautiful wedding, but I was only about 6 months sober at the time. And everyone in my life was like, you cannot get married. Like, this is a really bad idea. Focus on getting well first, on your mental health, rebuilding your confidence and your self-esteem. That would have been the smart thing to do, right? But I took a different approach. And you can only imagine how that went. So it was a Friday night wedding, and it was, imagine a room full of 12-inch tapered candles. Again, 280 to 300 people, absolutely beautiful gold and silver and candlelight, everything a woman could imagine, right? And the waitress walked up to me and said, Mrs. Morales, we understand that you want non-alcoholic champagne. And she said, the champagne glass on your left is like grapefruit juice, and the one on your right is champagne. And Lucy, it's as though the whole room faded black. And because I had not yet transformed my mindset and was still caught up in what I wanted, when I wanted it on my timeline, I took the champagne instead of the grapefruit juice. And not only did that really ruin the night of my wedding, but it also set me onto a course that ended up being the last 10 days of my addiction. And the kind of final story was, I was in treatment. So the wedding, and less than 30 days later, I'm in a treatment center with my new husband and my new family. And one of the doctors said, Mary Katherine, sit your ass down in the chair. Come over here and sit down. And he said, I have to tell you something. And he said, your husband loves you to the moon and back. You are an amazing woman. You're brilliant. You're smart, but your life is a mess. And he said, your life is like this beautiful crystal ball with 1,000 hairline fractures in it. And he said, you need to go back to your room and drop to your knees. And you got to ask God for help. And you really need to ask yourself, Mary Katherine, what do you want for your life? Do you want to be a mom? Do you want to be a wife? Do you want to work and have a successful career? Because he said, your husband loves you, but right now he's asking himself, what the fuck have I gotten myself into? Excuse my French, everybody. And he said, and he's not the kind of man that's going to be able to watch you go in and out of treatment centers for the rest of your life. What do you want? So you can only imagine how I felt. And he said, if you ever drink again, if you ever use, it'll be the ping in that crystal ball, and your life will never, ever look the same again. And I don't know if you or your listeners can listen to that. If you've ever been in what I like to call a come to Jesus meeting, where you've had to decide, am I going to go on living just like this? What do I really want in my life? So I went back to my room, I dropped to my knees, and I got another miracle. I prayed. I knew that I wanted to be a mom. I knew I wanted to be a wife. I knew I wanted to make a difference in the world. And after all of those years of feeling less than, shame, unworthiness, guilt, not good enough, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how many deals I closed, nothing made me feel complete. And it was in that moment for the first time I knew I could get sober and completely transform my life. And that's what I did. I left about 30 days later, free. I've never looked back. I completely changed my life. I took a one day at a time approach. My marriage was restored. My relationship with our daughter, Mia, was transformed. I have a career beyond my wildest dreams. It was a long road. There were a lot of practices that I had to put in place that I talk about in my book, Becoming a Woman of Principle. And I have a mentor named Simon T. Bailey, and he's been my mentor for about 17 years. And I've known, now I'm going to take you back to that day when the Spirit of the Lord said to me, you will write a book about the journey through hell to home. So it's one of those things where we all have a call and a purpose upon our life. And it's different for each of us. But I knew that I was called to write a book. And whether it impacts one woman or 100,000 women, I knew it was what God was calling me to do. And he said to me, Mary Katherine, are you going to do it? Like, what are you waiting for? And one last real encounter with the Spirit of God, it was over in Siesta Key, which is a beautiful beach in Florida. And my husband, Al, and our daughter, Mia, were still in the condo. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. It was absolutely beautiful morning in sunny Florida. And went out to the water by myself, and I dropped to my knees again. And I said, Father God, you've been talking to Simon, but you haven't said a word to me. What do you want from me? And I heard 3 words I had never heard before: woman of principle. And literally a download of information of what it was supposed to be like, the content, the feel, the theme. And I began to put that together. And to get today, I've been sober 16 years. I've built the life of my dreams. I have a beautiful marriage, an amazing career, and I'm a fundraiser in neuroscience and education. And I'm also a transformational mindset coach for women who truly want to explore their full potential. And live their life with purpose and power, who want to achieve their dreams and live a confident, joyful life. And so that's really my passion project. And I feel really grateful to say that after all I've been through, I think I'm the most confident woman I know. And again, I don't say that in a braggadocious way. I'm not perfect. Believe me, my husband will tell you she's not perfect. But I do have joy, and I'm comfortable in my skin today. I don't, taking, the listener all the way back to the beginning of where it started. I'm not insecure. I don't think I'm unworthy. I'm not filled with shame. I'm a powerful, confident woman today through the love of God. And I think part of it is because I did write my book, and I did follow what I think the Spirit of God really wanted me to do. And that's to try to make a difference in the life of the next person. And I'm really happy to be here, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
That story is so relatable because there's elements of it are very similar to what I went through. I went through it a bit later. I was in my mid 40s when I went through I call it scraping the bottom of shit barrel. But that feeling of I am not enough, that's a universal problem that I am seeing come up time and time again. And that's why I think now is the perfect time to start to help everybody understand that that's just you manifesting your own thoughts of shit in your head, and it's time to get them out. But one of the most important things that anybody needs to do when you want, there's that transformation that you want so desperately, and you touched on it. And that's the moment of complete surrender. Because only when you surrender, whether it's, regardless of your faith, if it's God, if it's the universe, whatever you believe in, that moment that you surrender yourself is the turning point, is the time that you then get to meet your other self, your true, authentic self. And that's when you get to explore those questions of, well, if I don't want to be this person, then who do I want to be? And for myself, again, the number 5 keeps coming up. I looked at the person I wanted to be and what were sort of, the 5 things about that person that I wanted to embody in who I am today. And that I then evolved into my journaling practice. So what were those 5 daily practices that you established for yourself that helped you in creating the transformation that you wanted?
Well, first, let me say I'm really grateful that you found your joy and your connection to the true source of love, right? And I know that there are people listening that come from many different beliefs and worldviews. As a Christian, I love the book of Ephesians because it tells us that we are loved, we are predestined, we are forgiven, we are accepted. I mean, scriptures tell us that we are strong and we are courageous, that we were made in the image of God. And going back to what you were saying, the spirit of love would never say, Mary Katherine, you are unworthy and you should feel bad about yourself. Or I forget the term you used about your moment when you decided, like, I don't want to live this way either. When I realized that I had adopted other people's negative beliefs and that I was living someone else's life, so to speak, and I lost myself along the way. And that's what actually happens. So that's what I teach as a woman of principle. And when my mentor, Simon, said, MK, how did you go from being an almost homeless addict, completely disheveled, to an executive in higher education and the founder of this community? Well, nobody had ever asked me that question before. And to be completely transparent, I had never really given it thought, like, what did I do every day, to get to who I am today? But it was 4:30 in the morning, and my husband and I love to go to Park City, Utah, and we love to go snow skiing. So I promised myself that I would start writing my book. And this is obviously many years ago. And I said, how did I become MK 2.0? Like, what did I actually do? And I went back to that old-fashioned pen and paper. So there are 5 practices that I implemented in my life. And I love the saying, what we practice, we become. So simple honesty, being your word, servant leadership, running with champions, and God first. Those are the 5 practices. And I truly believe, and I've done a lot of science and research on this, and I talk about it in my book, is that if we can master these 5 practices, then I think we could actually change our family dynamics, change the communities we live in, and ultimately impact the world. Because the way I teach it is that, for example, becoming beautifully transparent through the practice of simple honesty. So honesty is the practice, but transparency is the principle behind that. And I'm happy to explain that a little bit more if you think it'd be helpful.
Yeah, if you could expand on that, please.
Yeah. All right. So imagine there's a distinct difference between a practice and a principle, and actually a value. So imagine, for all of your listeners, that you have a beautiful, transparent pitcher of ice water. And it's this big, beautiful, crystal transparent pitcher of water. And little by little, you begin to drop black iced tea or dark coffee into this beautiful pitcher of water. And you can imagine one drop, it kind of like finds its way to the bottom. A second drop kind of finds its way to the bottom. But at some point, those drops of black tea or really dark coffee begin to change the context of the water in the container. And it's no longer transparent. It actually becomes light brown and eventually becomes dark like a cup of coffee. If you think in terms of your spirit and your soul, right? So we are spiritual beings that possess a soul that live in a physical body. What essentially happened in my own story of transformation is, as a young girl, I began to tell small white lies about myself. One little white lie at a time, 10 years old, 13 years old, 15 years old, 25 years old. I was living somebody else's life. I was living the pop culture life because I was in radio and TV, fast cars, celebrities, doing all of these things. But I lost my authenticity and I lost my transparency. And I stopped telling the truth about myself, about my beliefs. And I began, and all of these years later, I was no longer who God created me to be as a little girl. All of these white lies, I became somebody I didn't even recognize or know. But the good news and what I believe about the power of God and the resiliency of spirit, soul, and body is we can reverse that with every truth that we tell about ourselves. That dark picture, we wake up wondering, how did I get here, right? When we begin to reintroduce telling simple truths about ourselves and speaking powerfully in simple honesty, we can live in the principle of transparency. And the more transparent we are about ourselves and about our beliefs and opinions, the more power we have. And I'll give you a real example. Let's say you ask me a question about my political views. We got to pick something that's like people argue about, right? Critical race theory right now, religion, politics, something, that can create friction between people. Culture would say, Mary Katherine, you don't want to tell Lucy how you really feel about those things because it might cause an argument. She may not agree with you. She can't handle it. So I'm just going to tell Lucy a small white lie about my perspective. And that taints my soul, my beautiful, transparent soul. And instead of saying, Lucy, I want to tell you my real opinion about all of the things that we're talking about, do I have permission to be completely honest with you? So
I was just going to say, but that authenticity, and it's something that we often shy away from, part because the stories we tell ourselves, but authenticity and showing up as your real self, a lot of people carry fear around that because as you mentioned, you're afraid of being rejected.
Imagine, and you're absolutely right. What if we were to begin to create a world that, and this is what I teach in the Women of Principle community, is that we've got to learn how to have conversations with people that respect them as a child of God. Like we say that we were all created equal, right? That we're all children of God. And yet we're not honest with each other. How does that work? And so the way I talk about it is the principle of transparency and becoming a woman of principle doesn't mean that I'll do it perfectly. What it means is I practice simple honesty in the little things, and it builds up my courage to be honest and transparent about the bigger issues. But we talk we really talk in circles. Like, again, we're all children of God, but I can't be honest with this person about what I believe because ... And if I see you as a child of God, all created equal, why can't we have a conversation about just different belief systems and different perspectives and give each other permission for seeing the world differently, but at least we're being honest with each other.
And I think those of us who choose to see that we are all beautiful souls here having a human experience, when we can accept that, when we encounter people, whether we have difference of opinion, different political, whatever views, whatever differences that we have, if in those moments of, when you're talking to somebody and you want to say, no, you're wrong, that's not the way it should be, or this is why you shouldn't think that, I think it's important to step back and to be able to consciously tell yourself that the person you're having a conversation with is that beautiful soul having a human experience, and this is part of their journey. And I think once you can do that and you can step back and be an observer to the situation and to how humanity behaves, then those things, they don't matter. You don't get as bent out of shape. Now, the honesty in being who you are, that does take courage. That vulnerability takes courage.
Yes. And that's why I talk about it in terms of practicing simple honesty in the little things. So think back over the last 72 hours to a week, because they say the average adult lies at least 6 times a day. So if we live in a society where the average adult lies to some degree 6 to 11 times a day, and you multiply that times the size of your family, times the size of your company, times the size of your, I think we have 1.5 million people in Palm Beach County, Florida, which is where I live. How can we live in a community that is loving if we're not honest with each other? And Dr. Caroline Leaf is one of my favorite women of faith and neuroscientists. And her science actually shows that neurons that wire together, fire together, right? And that repeated lying is actually not just bad for your spiritual person, but it's also impacts your physical brain and is linked to faulty thinking. And it changes the neural pathways in your physical brain. And if 75 to 90% of illness is based on your thinking and your thought process, then being honest is not only good for your relationships, but science actually shows the more honest you are with yourself and others, the healthier you are. And so there's no shame in condemnation, but I invite people to take a look at, over the last 72 hours to a week, what are the white lies you may have told to yourself and to other people, and to kind of get at the root of that, because you are perfectly imperfect. You are loved beyond measure. You are valuable. And what would it be like for you? How would you feel about yourself if you could truly be honest about who you are, what you believe, and who you want to become?
Yeah. And there's the lies that we say out loud, but there's also the lies that we tell by omission, by staying silent. And I think, and that's such an incredibly hard situation to navigate right now, when our world just seems primed and ready to beat anybody up if they have the unpopular thought pattern, if they have the unpopular political stance or stance on our global situation. And so it is a struggle. And I can see personally, I can see how, yeah, I want to scream my truths, but I also acknowledge that for me, that's not my purpose. My purpose is by spreading the messages of my guests on the podcast, and it's about building my online community. That's where I'm going to be able to speak my truth and find the people that I can connect with and we can have open and honest conversations with. Because in our communities, we may not be ready for that yet. But if we build the place for it, then each person that we help grow and create the transformations in their life, that will spread out. It'll have the ripple effect.
Yeah. And, I always say what we say to ourselves once or 1,000 times, quietly or out loud, become realities, right? Transformation and what I teach, transformation is an inside out job. It's an inside out experience. And that's why we get to practice being honest with ourselves first. There's another amazing woman, female scientist, Dr. Courtney Warren, and she has an amazing TED Talk about becoming a more honest liar, right? Because there are self-deception, fear, there are so many reasons why people tell small white lies. But the freedom is in the simple honesty. And so the very first thing I would say is if people are suffering from either telling huge lies about themselves or their circumstances, or telling lots of little white lies, is to steer clear of those who practice gossip and lies, because the science actually shows that they're causing brain damage in you too. And there's lots of different studies on that. So spend less time with people that are gossiping and lying, because it's hurting your physical and spiritual health. And the next thing is to realize that thinking is a practice, and becoming honest overnight with ourselves and other people usually isn't this white light experience where I can go from being dishonest to being honest most of the time, because nobody's perfect, right? We all get caught where we're concerned or fearful about something. But there's a really big difference between your thoughts and your thinking. And your thinking is going to be linked to your ability to be honest. And then finally come to understand that you are loved and you are a child of God and you don't have to be perfect. And I always say, how I changed my life, because I was horrified. And when I wrote my book, I thought, oh my gosh, when people realize that I've been kidnapped, when people realize that I have a gunshot wound, when people realize that I suffered in darkness and silence for almost a decade with addiction, fear, unworthiness, and shame, what will they say about me? It took me 10 years to write my book because I was so afraid of what you would think about me. So this is not something I'm like, oh, I speak of, from an ivory tower. I know what it is like to have to overcome concern of what people will think about you and your perspectives. But I can tell you that as I develop the practices to learn how to become honest, I'm free. And I think most women I've coached over 15 years, they just want to be happy and free. They want to live a life where they can be who God is calling them to be.
MK, you've shared some valuable insight with us today, and I know people are going to want to continue the conversation with you. Where's the best place that they can connect with you and grab a copy of your book?
So I really appreciate that. We have a dynamic community. We've got about 1,300 women now, and I just love them all. If you're listening, I love you all. It's called Women of Principle. It's a private group on Facebook, but all are welcome. I also am on LinkedIn under Mary Katherine MK Morales. And I have a website called womanofprinciple.com. And they can sign up there. We're going to be doing some amazing things in the fall around transforming your mind, living courageously, some goal setting activities that really align with becoming all that God is calling you to be. And if you want to be part of that, I send out 1 email a week. I don't sell anything. You're not going to get spammed, but would very much love for you to be part of our community. All women are welcome.
If you're listening and you're looking at connecting with MK, make sure you check out the show notes. I'm going to have all of the links in there. And MK, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your story.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for the work that you do in the world to make it a better place and to help people to be brave and follow their dreams. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Roller Coaster Podcast. Want to chat or share your ideas about today's show? Pop me an email at hello@therollercoasterpodcast.com. Don't forget to connect with me on Facebook and Instagram at The Roller Coaster Podcast. Our theme song, Roller Coaster, was performed by The Lucky Setback. Audio editing by the one and only Jeff Quigley of Quigley Creative.
Life is like a roller